What up, friends? My name is Stan from Random Tens, and yes, it's finally here. Apologies to those who've been waiting, but things have been a little hectic behind the scenes, and with these particular videos, I want to give them the time they need, rather than rushing them out for the sake of consistency, and I'd forgotten how long Gen 4 can take if you try and do everything. But yeah, after 2 months of work, I'm finally ready to give my opinion on these beloved handheld games, and see if they're worthy of all that remake talk that's been going on for years now. Will they surpass Crystal and possibly even Emerald? Well, let's find out in this Gen 4 in-depth review. The games. After not only the global success of Ruby and Sapphire, but also the Gen 1 remakes, it was pretty much a guarantee that Game Freak would eventually get back on the proverbial saddle and give fans yet another adventure for the brand new Nintendo DS. And after a few years of waiting, Junichi Masuda and his team welcomed the world to the gorgeous Sinnoh region in the forms of Pokémon Diamond and Pearl. Despite these games releasing during what could be considered the franchise's weakest era, the series' rabid fanbase as well as the DS's global popularity led to Diamond and Pearl eventually outselling Ruby and Sapphire as the 5th best-selling titles on the system. At the time of their release, I was a pretty awkward teenager, and beyond playing the campaign quickly on my brother's copy of Diamond, I pretty much skipped this generation entirely. However, about 2 years later, the team created yet another sister version of the games in the form of Pokémon Platinum, which I didn't pick up until only last year at a flea market on the cheap. Dubbed the ultimate Pokémon version by Masuda himself, this massive game made many changes to the Sinnoh region, including superior Wi-Fi, more wild Pokémon, and some incredible post-game content. But despite all of these improvements, does Platinum live up to Masuda's promise? Is this the ultimate Pokémon version? Well, dust off your old DS and let's find out. The story. I want to preface the actual review by making it very clear that this is a review of Pokémon Platinum and only Pokémon Platinum. I know in my previous videos I've done a few comparisons here and there between version exclusives. However, despite my love for Diamond and Pearl, it's my opinion that when it comes to Gen 4, Platinum isn't just a director's cut, it's the best version by a mile. This opinion may be controversial, but I feel like if you've owned this game, then you probably understand where I'm coming from. And with that little caveat out of the way, let's start at the very beginning. Like their predecessors, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are pseudo-reboots that serve as their own self-contained stories. This time we begin in Twinleaf Town, where our protagonist Lucas or Dawn, depending on which gender you choose, are messing around with their childhood friend Barry, and stumble upon the renowned Professor Rowan and his assistant while attempting to run through some tall grass. After a lot of talking and some admittedly funny dialogue between Barry and the Professor, Rowan decides to entrust our heroes with their first ever Pokémon. In Gen 4, your choices are between Turtwig, Chimchar, and Piplup, with my heart forever belonging to the adorable green turtle. After you've secured your starter and battled Barry for the first time, you'll eventually stumble across a weird blue-haired man at Lake Verity. He talks to himself about legendary Pokémon and then suspiciously walks off, leaving the player already asking questions, which is a pretty good start. Eventually, our hero and Barry obtain Pokédexes from Rowan, and along with their new partner set out to catch them all in order to assist the professor in his research of Pokémon evolution. Not long after beginning your quest, you'll stumble upon Looker, a member of the International Police who's on the prowl for any suspicious grown-ups who may be hanging around. You see, there's a small cult-like group of people known as Team Galactic who all wear ridiculous outfits and sport bowl cuts who've been up to no good across Sinnoh. You'll learn that despite being odd, the group is seemingly harmless, and after another battle with Barry, you'll head east to Orberg City, where you can obtain your first gym badge from the rock Pokemon enthusiast, Rourke. One of the things I love about these games is how each town and each leader seem to have some sort of practical purpose, such as Orberg serving as a mining mecca, as I feel as it gives the entire region a lot more personality than Hoenn. Either way, once you've beaten Rourke, our hero will make their way through Eterna Forest in order to face off against Gardenia of Eterna City to collect their second badge from the Grass-type gym leader. It's also in Eterna City that you'll cross paths with Jupiter, the second of Team Galactic's commanders, with the first being Mars, who was beaten between badges at the Valley Windworks on the way to Eterna Forest. Regardless, once you take down Jupiter, it's time to proceed on quite a journey before you eventually end up in Hearthome City, where you can partake in super contests as well as grab your third gym badge from the Ghost-type master, Fantina. Seriously though, it'll take you a while between obtaining the Forest and Relic badges, so be prepared for tons of battles along the way. Anyways, after passing through Solacean Town and heading north, you'll eventually find yourself in Veilstone City. It's here in this gambling town that you'll find Team Galactic's headquarters. However, you'll be turned away at the entrance, and instead you'll take on the fighting-type gym leader Maylene in order to add the Cobble badge to your growing collection. After besting Maylene, you'll take on some goons from Team Galactic in order to help the professor's assistant retrieve their Pokédex, and after a quick chat with Looker, it's become apparent that perhaps Team Galactic may not be as harmless as they initially seemed. Despite his apprehensions, Looker sets you on a path towards Pastoria City, where you'll come across a shifty-looking member of Team Galactic, as well as the one and only Crasher Wake. This legendary Water-type user is the city's gym leader, as well as Barry Sensei in the art of everything Pokémon, and once defeated, he'll reward your efforts with the Fen badge and some manly words of advice. However, during your battle, that suspicious member of Team Galactic set off a bomb in the Safari Zone, and so it's up to you to chase the fiend back up to Lake Valor, where you'll also run into your old friend Cynthia. Cynthia is an older trainer who seems to always appear when the player needs her most, and this time she offers the advice of her grandmother in order to help figure out what Team Galactic are up to at the lakes. And it's upon reaching Cynthia's grandmother in Celestic Town that the game's real narrative is revealed, as you learn about the various legendary Pokémon in Sinnoh, as well as battle Cyrus, Team Galactic's powerful leader. Yeah, remember that creepy guy from the beginning of the game? Turns out he's planning to capture the Lake Guardians, Mesprit, Azelf, and Uxie in order to obtain something. But after he's defeated, Cyrus will retreat, and Cynthia's grandmother will point you towards Canalave Library, where you can study up on Sinnoh's various myths and legends, as well as nab your 6th badge from the town's Steel-type gym leader Byron, who also happens to be Rourke's distant father. And after meeting up with Barry, Professor Rowan, and Lucas Ordon in Canalave's library, a giant explosion will send you to investigate Lake Valor, where you'll face Commander Saturn, who successfully captured Valor's Psychic-type guardian Azelf. Now it's up to you and Barry to head way north in order to save Uxie at Lake Acuity, and beat Snowpoint City's gym leader Candace in order to obtain your 7th badge. Unfortunately though, by the time you're able to reach the Lake's Guardian, Team Galactic has already captured them and sent them back to their base in Veilstone, where you'll need to rescue all 3 legendary Pokémon in order to save the world from Cyrus's evil plot. It's after you've traveled to Team Galactic HQ that you realize Cyrus and his cronies have been doing some horrific experiments on Pokémon in order to learn about their evolution properties so that Cyrus may create his own perfect world from the energy harnessed. It's sort of a perversion of the exact research that Rowan does, and it really helps cement this cult of criminals as the most disturbing and vile organization yet. And so you must clear the warehouse, free the Lake Guardians, and follow Team Galactic to the historic Spear Pillar on Mount Coronet in order to prevent Cyrus from obliterating the current universe. Once there, however, Cyrus reveals his true colors and attempts to summon a being of pure energy, only to find himself at the mercy of something much more sinister. And it's here that players encounter the game's mascot, Giratina, in the Distortion World, which to date may be one of the most interesting and confusing areas in all of Pokémon. However, after a grueling battle with both Cyrus and Giratina, the former will concede defeat, and with that the day is saved from total annihilation once again thanks to an 11-year-old kid. And so, with Cyrus beaten and Team Galactic no more, the only thing left to do is for our hero to obtain the 8th and final badge from Sunnyshore's gym leader Volkner, and officially take on the Elite Four at Sinnoh's renowned Pokémon League. However, as per tradition, you'll have one final intense battle with Barry before taking on the challenge, and once beaten, he'll finally admit that perhaps he's still got a little training to do. And with all obstacles demolished and all battles won, it's time for the ultimate showdown between our hero and the Elite Four. First up is the Bug-type user Aaron, who's admittedly a bit of a pushover if you have at least one Fire or Flying-type member in your party. Next we have this region's token old person in Bertha and her Ground-type team. She can be a bit tricky, but she's certainly no Flint, who's the 3rd trainer in this gauntlet. This Fire-type specialist's offensive team will make you forget all about his silly red afro as you try to douse the fire in his heart. His words, not mine. And finally, last but not least, you'll take on William, a Psychic-type master who'll leave your team in shambles if you've got no special defense. William, in my opinion, is the first true threat of the Elite Four, but with enough patience and speed, you'll finally move on to the Sinnoh League champion, the one and only Cynthia. Yes, as almost everyone here could guess, Cynthia is Gen 4's champion, and along with being debatably the most popular champion in the entire series, she's also got one heck of a team. For most folks, it's her perfect Garchomp and level 60 Lucario that pose the most problems, but overall, she's an absolute monster of a trainer, so make sure you're prepared before taking on the league for this member alone. Either way, when her last Pokemon finally calls it quits and you've emerged victorious, Cynthia will admit defeat and confer her title as champion to you. And with a visit from Professor Rowan and a trip to the Hall of Fame, you've officially beaten this long and difficult game, despite still having ways to go after the credits roll. Although beyond a surprisingly touching reunion between Barry and his Frontier Brain father Palmer, I think it's best to save the post-game stuff for the other sections, as most of it's gameplay related rather than story. So what did I think of Platinum's narrative? Well, despite starting slow, I liked it. Actually, compared to Gen 3's, I would say I possibly even loved it. I feel like Barry is an excellent rival with a decent character arc, and I believe Team Galactic is used in a strong way that brings together great characters, epic locales, and of course, a little mythology and great storytelling to boot. Now, obviously, I'll go into more detail in the next section, but in summation, Generation 4's narrative is probably the best so far in terms of these reviews, and I feel like these games are where Masuda and his team really started hitting their stride as world builders. But for more on all that, let's jump right into the pros, shall we? The pros. As I've stated in previous reviews, virtually every core generation of Pokemon games have particular threads or thematic motifs that run through them, and although Gen 4 may be the most difficult to place, to me at least the major theme is one of belief. I'm aware that many will point to Sinnoh's vast mythology and history as the game's underlying threads, and for the most part I agree. I just think that they serve the larger narrative of believing in something even when hope seems lost. Whether it's as simple as Barry learning to believe in himself and his Pokemon, or the more literal interpretation of believing in creation and something greater than ourselves, Gen 4 is chock full of allegories to religion, faith, and of course spirit, and yet somehow they managed to do this subtly without making an uncomfortable experience for the player, which is pretty remarkable. Heck, the entire plot culminates in Cyrus's despicable true nature summoning the series equivalent of... well, you can figure it out. But throughout it all, Cyrus believes in his actions, that he's doing the right thing, despite how horrific and selfish it may be. He truly feels that the world has become devoid of beauty, and believes the only way to patch the cracks is to begin again with humanity devoid of spirit, which is pretty messed up for a kid's game. And while we're on the topic of their leader, let's finally talk about one of my favorite parts of Gen 4, Team Galactic. I really enjoy how the developers sort of tricked us into believing that this group was somehow more bumbling than Team Rocket, only to reveal the true operation behind the curtain, which is by far the most sinister of any crime organization yet. Yes, the grunts are pretty laughable, and some of the conflicts can feel like padding, but with actual commanders like Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, as well as seriously creepy members like Sharon and Cyrus, these guys mean business, and even better, they're actually memorable with a plan that makes sense. But shying away from story for a little, let's talk about the sole gameplay feature that makes this a winning gen for most competitive folks out there, the physical and special split. Praise Arceus, this one small addition to the series changed everything for the better, as now a Pokemon's moves have nothing to do with the typing, but rather if they hit you physically or not. So moves like Thunder Punch were finally physical, and moves like Signal Beam were finally special, which meant that in conjunction with things like natures and abilities, you could truly personalize your Pokemon and how they battled even further. And while we're on the topic of gameplay, I'm throwing this out here right now. In my personal opinion, Pokemon Platinum is the best and most fun battling experience I've ever had in the franchise to this day. So much so that replaying Platinum has actually gotten me re-energized to take up competitive play in Gen 7, which is something I've neglected for a few generations now. Mind you, battles in Platinum can be rather slow due to the new engine, but honestly the refined and dare I say perfected system is enough to compensate for that small issue, and if you play these games for bragging rights, then this is your generation. Battling is fun, complex, and most importantly, engaging, and for the first time ever, you could take on friends and strangers across the world thanks to the global trade system in Jubilife City. As expected, the introduction of Wi-Fi changed the entire series, and even in Generation 7, its legacy can still be felt. Finally, you could complete the Pokédex without using a link cable or a physical peripheral, and those willing enough could take on players from around the world to prove they were the best trainers alive. Now, unfortunately, as this was the first iteration of Wi-Fi into the series, the actual process was a bit shaky, and Gen 5 would make some much-needed refinements, but at the time, we didn't care, because this one new addition created hours of new and exciting replayable content. And along with internet access, the games also gave us our first touchscreen experience thanks to the DS's dual-screen technology. This often unnoticed improvement in how you interact with the world around you was especially helpful while navigating the menu, and it also made for some fun additions, like the underground mining game as well as the Pokétch, which allowed players to count steps, track roaming legendaries, and check the status of their Pokemon on the bottom screen as they played. Again, it's one of those things that we sort of take for granted now, but two screens was a really clever way of making the experience feel more immersive, and nowadays I can't imagine we'll ever get a core series game without some form of touch controls. And now folks, it's time we get into my personal favorite aspects of Gen 4, starting with everyone's favorite rival, Barry. This blonde-haired goofball is pretty much me in sprite form, as he's impulsive, wildly proud to a fault, and starts the game trying to immediately catch a legendary Pokémon. However, unlike me, he's actually pretty funny. In fact, Gen 4 as a whole has by far the most hilarious and at times surreal humor of any game yet, and between Barry and Looker, I found myself actually doing double takes throughout some of the more serious parts of the game. Most of all though, I love how confident Barry is in both himself and his Pokémon. Yes, he can be a little obnoxious at times, but this is a rival who, despite not being a total ass, still manages to be memorable and have a small arc. Unlike most characters in fiction, Barry starts off perhaps a little too confident and a little too hasty, but through experiences with his Poké friends and eventually listening and growing thanks to the advice of Crash or Wake and even Team Galactic, he evolves into a more well-rounded and more serious Pokémon trainer who just wants to make his father proud. And I think on some level, we can all sort of relate to that mentality. Now, let's talk about the postgame, and oh man, is there a lot to cover. Remember how I said that Emerald had the best postgame minus Gen 2's Kanto adventure? Well, I could not have been more wrong, because Pokémon Platinum's postgame is somehow even better. We're talking a revamped and frankly more accessible Battle Frontier, rematchable gym leaders and Elite Four, tons of legendary and rare Pokémon to capture, including both Dialga and Palkia, an entire resort area that only opens up after the initial story is completed, as well as one of the coolest twists ever in the form of Professor Oak himself. That's right, if you manage to see all 210 Pokemon in your Sinnoh Dex, the original Kanto Professor will show up and not only upgrade your Pokédex to include all Pokemon thus far, he'll also give you access to the Pal Park, which will enable you to transfer your Gen 3 critters into Sinnoh via a fun minigame. On top of that, you'll also unlock Moltres, Articuno, Zapdos, Cresselia, and the remainder of the Battle Resort area, where you can get new Pokemon and battle Heatran. It's like they took the best parts of both Emerald and Fire Red's post-games and merged them into one spectacular feast, and my god is it delicious. But finally, it's time we get into everyone's favorite sections, the music and the brand new Pokemon. In terms of the former, once again, Go Ichinos and the entire composing team crushed it, giving the world of Sinnoh its most varied and interesting score yet. This is a blue-collar region, and the music really brings that element out between its rustic and at times almost western feel. Now, I'll go on record and say that it's probably my least favorite soundtrack among all core Pokemon games, but once again, it's worth noting that Pokemon music is the pizza of the gaming industry, as even when it's not my favorite personal brand, it's still appetizing as hell. In fact, some of my all-time favorite tracks come from this region, including Jubilife City, the nighttime Pokemon theme, and of course Cynthia's battle theme, which is probably my all-time favorite battle music across every game in the entire series. Yeah, it's that good. And with music out of the way, that just leaves the Pokemon themselves, and despite getting a bad rap from a lot of folks, I actually really enjoy this roster. It's not as consistent as Gen 3's, but when these designs work, they really work, and for those claiming that hitting up past gens for new evolutions is a bad thing, please refrain from watching basically every review from here on out, since that's just a thing that we have to accept from this franchise going forward. It's how they connect the old and the younger generations of players, and besides, when you get amazing pocket monsters like Electivire and Gliscor, do you really have anything to whine about? Some of my personal favorite Gen 4 additions include Torterra, Luxray, Staraptor, Vespiquen, the Fossils, Gastrodon, Mismagius, Garchomp, Spiritomb, Lucario, Hippowdon, Mantike, Weavile, Togekiss, Electivire, the new evolutions, Gliscor, Gallade, Frostlass, Dusknoir, the Lake Guardians, and virtually every legendary and mythical Pokemon, minus maybe Heatran and Phione. Also, it's worth mentioning that this was the gen where they finally tried to outdo Mew by giving us the creator of everything within the Pokemon universe. So yeah, those who think Gen 4's roster sucks are out of their minds, because despite not having a ton of original designs, the ones we did get were for the most part brilliant. And speaking unbiasedly, Gen 4 may be the best roster we've ever gotten at one single time, at least thus far in this review series. Okay, so we all good? You feeling all warm and fuzzy knowing that I loved a lot about your favorite generation? That's good, because I'm about to undo all of that goodwill in just a moment. Hope you got your Kleenex ready. The cons. This generation is slow. Yeah, I know that's a recurring joke thrown around by Gen 4 haters, but you know what? They're not wrong. It took me almost 3 hours to finally get my first gym badge, and yeah, you can fiddle with items like tech speed and battle animations to accelerate the process, but even so, I honestly believe the game suffers from severe pacing issues. We're talking long gaps between gyms, cryptic hints that send you on wild goose chases, particularly between the 7th and 8th gyms, and often very slow and tedious battles. It takes a long time to level up, to use recovery moves, and don't even get me started on status moves and weather battles. The guiltiest offender of all, though, is the actual plot itself. Yes, you have a few run-ins with Team Galactic and Cyrus early on, but if I'm being honest, I was bored out of my mind going from town to town up until around Veilstone, where admittedly the story got really great and kept me hooked for the rest of the game. But it took me around 10 hours to even get to that point, and yeah, I know there's plenty of you out there who can probably get there in half of that time, but I'm not making this review for you. I tried to make these videos in hopes of inspiring younger people to go back and check out these brilliant games, as well as hopefully bring back some older fans who haven't played them in years, and for those folks, they're likely going to be in for a bit of a dull time at first. And along with the pacing, I also have to be unfairly critical of this game's difficulty, because those of you used to more recent installments are in for a very rude awakening. I'd be lying if I said I personally didn't enjoy how frustratingly tough these games can be at times, because frankly, for us more competitive people out there, these games are a breath of fresh air compared to the hand-holding of later games. Virtually every major character or gym leader will have Pokemon much higher leveled than your own throughout the entire game, and unless you ventured through Sinnoh on multiple occasions, odds are you're going to black out more times than the previous 3 gens combined. And honestly, I have no idea how a 7-year-old in 2009 beat this game, because I had some troubles in this one, and I sort of play Pokemon for a living now, so what does that say? I know this is a controversial opinion, and people will tell me that I'm the one to blame here, but to me there's a difference between difficult and unforgiving, and this game crosses that line a little too much for a general audience, even if once again I personally really appreciate the challenge as a veteran of the series. Also, while I'm sort of still on the topic of pacing, you know what really kills your fun while you're trying to catch them all and progress through the story? The need to use HMs in like half of the major areas in the game. Surf, Fly, and Strength I can sort of get behind since they're decent moves, but seriously Game Freak, you remove Dive only to create Defog and Rock Climb?
Why?
And yeah, Defog is sort of optional, but if you don't use it when things get misty, trainer battles become a nightmare, and of course Rock Climb may be one of the worst necessary HMs in any Pokemon game ever. I basically had to neuter my team at multiple points throughout the game in order to accomplish some goal or access some hidden area, and quite a few of these times you're nowhere near a Pokemon Center, so HM slaves are practically useless after the first few towns. And that's sort of my big issue here. The game is hard enough that you need to raise and train 6 strong Pokemon to even stand a chance, but then you need HMs like all of the time to keep going. It's just a massive pain that players have to make the decision between quality and adaptability, and honestly, I'd recommend in future playthroughs just adding a Bibarel on your team even if it's not remarkable, because it flat out sucks when you find yourself stuck somewhere with no way to climb a wall or smash a rock just to proceed in your adventure. Beyond pacing, difficulty, and HM issues though, my only real complaint is a lack of creativity in the world and the region. And yeah, that sounds like a bit of a contradiction when you consider my pros section, but let me explain. Yes, the touchscreen features, Wi-Fi implementation, and refined battle mechanics were big steps forward, and I won't try to undermine them at all. And yeah, I think the plotline is superb, and the roster of Pokemon is fantastic. But for the most part, I sort of feel like this game is just the best of what's come before. A more polished and refined entry that leaves the others in the dust in terms of enjoyment, but also doesn't take many risks. Gen 1 was the creator. Gen 2 gave us shinies, breeding, a day and night cycle. Gen 3 gave us double battles, abilities and natures, contests, weather, and the battle frontier. But Gen 4 is a little bit stagnant. We have the day and night cycle making a return, we have a better battle frontier, better contests, as well as better graphics, sprites, and a ruthless crime organization, but nothing throughout your journey really stands out as particularly fresh. Which again isn't all a bad thing. Masuda wanted this game to be the ultimate Pokemon version, and in almost every conceivable way it is. But with very little risks, it can also sometimes feel just a little overly familiar, which I think is another reason why I found it a bit dull in the beginning, especially coming off of Emerald and Fire Red. But finally, it's time to get into the worst of the Gen 4 Pokemon, and well, surprisingly, there's not as many as you'd think. I mean, yeah, you got Burmy, Cherim, Carnivine, and the Finian line, but even when Gen 4 fails, it fails in such a memorable way that you can't really fault it. Also, yeah, I think that the roster of legendary Pokemon is a little bloated, but with most of them being either integral to the story or having either a great design or mythology around them, I can forgive the ridiculous amount for the most part. What I'm a little less forgiving about is the fact that in Platinum at least, there are 5 roaming legendary Pokemon to capture. Yes, that's right, 5. That's almost double Crystal and Emerald combined, and offers the worst sort of padding to the postgame I can think of. But I will say you can at least track them with the Pokétch app, so there is a little, small, teeny silver lining there. So yeah, I guess after going in on these games for their small but noticeable flaws, I've probably alienated a few hardcore fans, but regardless of a few dumb roamers, I once again think that this is a varied and enjoyable roster of Pokemon, and with that, let's get into the verdict, as well as wrap this thing up. Final verdict. Honestly, it's a shame that when these games first came out, I was at an age where Pokemon was considered to be uncool on the playground, because I truly feel like these were the games I needed when I was entering high school. Yeah, they're ridiculously hard and tedious at times, but with compelling characters, a breathtaking story, and a message about believing in yourself and the strength in others, they're incredible pieces of art that Game Freak should be immensely proud of. Is Gen 4 the ultimate version? Well, I don't think so, because a lot of that will depend on your personal preferences and experiences. But I do consider it one of the best developed and most robust entries among the entire series, and if you've only ever played Diamond and Pearl, I urge you to get Platinum as soon as possible, because trust me, you're missing out on the best way to experience Sinnoh. And with that, I'm going to give Pokemon Platinum a solid A. It's got debatably the best roster of Pokemon yet, a world that feels alive, as well as the best story, characters, and battling system of any game to date. And if it only had have been a smidge faster and taken a few more risks, I would have felt comfortable calling it one of the best games I've ever played, period. So if you're eagerly awaiting a remake of Diamond and Pearl, stop staring at your phone waiting for an announcement and pop this phenomenal entry into your 3DS, because in my opinion, Pokemon Platinum is the best these games will ever get. Well, there it was in all of its Sinnoh-y glory. I hope you guys don't mind that this one took a little bit longer to make. There is a lot in these games, and I do apologize for those of you who have been anxiously awaiting this review. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at everyone's favorite Gen 2 remakes in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Will this version be able to outdo all of the good I found in Gen 2 already? Well, you'll have to tune in this spring to find out, because it's probably going to take me a while to record all of the footage. But regardless, I hope you guys really did enjoy this review. And as I always say, happy hunting, baby rhinos, and I promise more content is on the way, so stay tuned.